super high tech. Here it is, partially assembled. Welcome back to the Lost Cause Ranch. Today we get rid of this thing and build our own beefy high clearance hitch for the LR4. See, this is high and there's clearance. On the LR3, LR4, and Range Rover Sport, there is a few different options or ways to go about having a trailer hitch. This particular one here is probably the least advantageous outside of price. But let's get this tore off and we'll go through how you can tow with your Land Rover. All right, so there is what I would say 4 common ways of going about a trailer hitch on one of these. First and most obvious way would be the little ingenious one that Land Rover designed. And that guy slots into this piece in the rear frame. As you can see here, it is a wedge-shaped proprietary little design they came up with a unique locking mechanism and pin. And that guy slots up into here, pin locks it in through that hole, and that gives you the full 7,700 pound rating. You can also go the conventional route with a frame mounted trailer hitch that you would see on most vehicles. Third option would be one of these guys. This bolts onto these ears here with a third bolt that goes through the back here where the factory pin would go. I'd say this is an all right option for like a light bike rack or maybe a small utility trailer, and they are quite inexpensive for that use. But anything nearing that 7,700 pounds, I would not recommend. The tongue weight is going to be a killer on these, placing a lot of downward force onto these ears, and they were not designed for that. We have had a couple LR3s and LR4s over the years that did have this section cracked. That's not what Land Rover designed it for. So these are what I would consider light duty, not for hauling another Land Rover with your Land Rover. Fourth option is quite suitable for a Land Rover that is lifted and designed to go off-road, and that is a high clearance hitch. I'm aware of 3 companies that currently make high clearance hitches, and that is Safari Guard, the Rhino Ox, and the Mitch hitch. All 3 of those use a similar principle, and that is making the main anchor point this hook with a bushing in between and the receiver either sitting here or somewhere here, which gives you a nice departure angle off the rear. The factory slot in one, that is the main downfall. It is known as the plow for a reason. It hangs down quite low, and if you're using an off-road trailer or anything, you're gonna be digging quite a bit. Not a huge hindrance if you're staying on the road. But today we are gonna build our own little high clearance hitch coming off that main anchor point, and we're gonna start off with a nice chunk of new receiver tube and chop this down. The thing I like about the high clearance hitches is your pulling force is off this nice beefy ring here, along with the factory frame slot, and your tongue weight force is going to be pressed up against here because of the leverage instead of pulling down like this guy and risking breaking these ears off. So our design is going to come straight off this hook here with the receiver tube. We're gonna make a bolt-in wedge plate that sandwiches this back along with bolting in here. That plate will bolt into our receiver hitch. So we'll have bolt here, 2 bolts here, and a nice big one through our bushing. So we obviously need to chop this guy down some. That would be a bit ridiculous. We need to figure out how far back we're going before we hit the frame. We finally get to use our tools. Sure is nice having the tools back. Still too far out. The Safari Guard and Rhino sit a little bit below this hook here. The Mitch hitch sits straight out from the hook. We're gonna do our own little version of that. Except on ours, we're gonna leave the receiver tube and the ears that bolt through the hook all one piece. So we're gonna lay out our holes here, slot the top and bottom of the tube so we can slide right over our hook here. So we'll make this relief cut on both sides. So we got our first slot cut in there. Turned out pretty swell, I think. Now we just need to flip this guy, match it on the other side. Got both slots in there now, and we can slide right over. Man, is it nice to have the tools back. So next up, we're gonna lay out the hole for our big bolt that goes through the hook. It'll be somewhere in this vicinity. Now we're just gonna knock these corners off and pretty up this a little bit. We're gonna round them some. I mean, it's gotta look good too, right? Kind of rained a little hard right now, but this gives you a little bit of an idea what it's going to look like. This is roughly the position it's going to sit. We'll obviously have some bracing down to this one. We get to use all the fun tools today. We're going to make our little sleeve for inside the hook. I'm going to fit it up with a piece of Delrin because this is a lot quicker machine. And I don't have a chunk of 1.5 inch solid aluminum sitting here, so I'll have to go grab some. So Delrin to fit everything up. I believe we need to knock this guy down to about 44 millimeters to slip right in there. And we'll drill a hole for our 16 millimeter bolt. This is a little handier than the mill. We got the power feed going on it. So it's a little more hands-free and I can be lazy. So we got the dead center on the back here. I'm gonna pop that out, switch it out with the chuck, so we can drill our center hole. That is the nice thing about the power feed. We can be doing other things, and it's still working. So we're gonna pop this guy off. Check the fitment. Just need to take off a touch more. And now we try it out here. Perfect, nice tight fit. So we have our bushing spacer made up. Turned out pretty swell. This spacer is gonna slide in that ring and work something like this. And that there is how we are going to have our main attachment point off that ring. So now that we have the receiver bolted up and the spare tire removed, we can start making our little wedge plate that will bolt on to where the factory hitch slides into. So what I'm going to do here is make a flat plate that has bolt holes to go into these two ears, and it'll be about yay big, and we will have a wedge that goes up into where the factory hitch slides, and also a plate on the back side here, and we will bolt through this hole there along with these two holes, and then we will have a plate that surrounds the receiver that comes down, bends, and meets these two bolts as well. That will hold this up into place and should give some significant strength to this guy here. Good to see our frame weights are still intact. So this piece is going to sit just like that. All right, so these are the pieces for our little wedge, but we went ahead and tacked a nut on the back side. This guy will sit just like that, and we'll be able to run a bolt in from the back side of that frame. So we got our little wedge plate tacked together. This guy will slide right into the factory hole there at the bottom. And we got the supervisor back in action. What do you think, Sasha? She's got the perfect view on what's going on over here. Just have a bolt in the back here to hold this in place. Now we can lay out our piece that goes from here up to this. And what we're gonna do is straight with a bend right here, flat piece across the bottom, and we're gonna have our safety chain holes made into that piece there, and then we'll tie in a vertical one for some extra support. Super high tech, but we have the receiver leveled out. Now we can accurately make up the lower piece. What I'm actually going to do to lay this one out is use a piece of welding rod. That way I can get the length, and I can also use it for the correct bend. And then we're going to recycle, and after it's all made, I can use it to weld it. We'll just snip it to length. Make sure we got that bend correct. We will just snip it to length on the back side. So this is where we're going to bend it. It'll be right at the edge of this hole here, and with that hole we'll be able to weld to the bottom of the receiver tube. But before we bend it, I'm going to lay out our safety chain holes, and we'll probably hit those in the mill while it's flat because it'd be easier, and I'm all about easy some days. So there's our safety chain points, and what we'll do after we get this all bent and welded up, I'm going to make another rectangle this size with that hole in it and double up the thickness there. And those will work perfect for the smaller chains on the small utility size trailers. You can just slip it on. Then on the bigger ones that have a hook similar to like this winch, I'll just have a set of D-rings that we can just attach to those holes there and be good. So I'm gonna run some bolts through to hold this bottom plate in place. This thing's starting to shape up, getting a feel on how it's gonna come together. We're gonna clamp this guy tight and roll the little MIG over to tack it in. But you can see the clearance and departure angle is quite nice. I may switch up how I was planning on bracing this earlier. I was gonna come up like the Rhino and Safari Guard do, but I may come down to the side, match this angle, and brace it in that way. We'll see. So we got our clamp on there, holding this guy exactly where it needs to be. With just a couple tacks on, we can do the shake test. That's obviously the exact same amount of force a trailer with another Land Rover on it is gonna exert onto this. Exactly the same. No, it's not. I think we'll do something like that to brace down to this. So there's our two side pieces. So here is the last piece we made up. We just need to tack this on before we can blow the whole thing apart and finish weld it up. This one is going to go right about there and be the final piece that sandwiches this factory hitch receiver piece that is welded directly into the frame. This will bolt through to that wedge plate that we made, then squeeze all three pieces together, locking this guy in. The site supervisor is out on her union break, apparently ready for a nap. Here's our conglomeration of pieces before we weld them all together. Wedge piece, the actual receiver itself, and our sandwich plate. It sits something like that in there. So here's all our points of contact. We have this around the big hook. That'll take our main pulling force. We have that spacer in there. Our wedge plate, that goes into where the factory receiver goes. And our little sandwich plate that bolts through and squeezes our wedge plate, then our two 16mm bolts. All right, so you know why I always use incredibly cheap gloves? Try and keep them around $1 a pair. Because magically, I just had them on and now I can't find them. I did the typical Joe move and set them in what I imagine is the dumbest place possible. Good news is my work area is from here in a straight line over to here. So I don't have much ground to cover to find anything, but this is how I waste my life. Found them, why wouldn't you put them in the back of the bandsaw? I'm my own worst enemy. Now we get to recycle our little template. So we pretty much have everything all buzzed together. It's a little warm yet, but we got our plug hole welded in. Smash my finger. Last piece is gonna be these guys. We're gonna double up the thickness on our safety chain loops. Got our buddies hanging out down below. Her two little fawns just ran up the trail. So we are all finished up now. Here it is, partially assembled. Our spacer that slides into the hook, relief cut for said hook, our little wedge plate that goes into where the factory receiver slots into, and we're bolting through the factory lock pinhole, squeezing everything together, and we're sandwiching all three of those plates together through the side ears. Doubled up for our safety chain loop. But this is what we're working with here. Should be a nice stout unit. Quite the contraption going on in the rear here. Added a couple little gussets to strengthen this plate up. Guess we'll find out if it still fits. There's all the hardware we'll be using. Not quite exactly sure the order of operations here. We're just gonna finger tight everything until it's all bolted up. Apparently Sasha spotted something. What's out there? Not terrible. That sure cleans it up a bit. Just look at how much clearance we have there. Definitely wouldn't have been able to do that with the old one or the factory one. And this was not a staged pile of rocks at all. I would never do such a thing. But no, I think our homebrew high clearance hitch is looking pretty good. Super happy with how that turned out. We have a ton of departure angle compared to before. The same amount as if we had no hitch on there at all. It can even hold a trailer. That's a great thing for a trailer hitch to do. Don't mind the receiver pin not being in there. That's what the safety chains are for. It's a good thing the safety steward's far enough away. We have a lot of obstacles going on in the back, but the fact that you can see it pretty well in the rear view camera is super nice. We are still missing one thing in that hole, but we have that guy right here. That there's our trailer wiring. We'll do a short video in the future on getting that guy all installed. Let me know what you guys think of this thing down below. We now have 21.5 inches of clearance to the bottom of the receiver. If I have room on the top side, I might flip these bolts around to gain a touch more clearance there because the head is the only thing hanging below the rear bumper itself. But I'm pleased with how that turned out. First time getting to use the little fab area in the new shop. First time using the 220 outlets. Didn't even burn the place down. Must have done something right. But there is the Lost Cause Ranch take on a high clearance receiver for the LR3, LR4, and Range Rover Sport. I'll put a link down below to the other high clearance options I mentioned earlier in the video, but this gives you the ability to have a lifted off-road trailer. I mean, the bottom of the factory receiver sits somewhere in this area. Factory one's called the Plow. This one's not. With that being said, appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate you subscribing. We got aluminum here, templates there. Next video, we're gonna have a floor and a transmission tunnel in the Defender. Have a good night. The big downfall of the high clearance hitches that I see is sticks out of the back bumper a little bit, but it really wouldn't be high clearance and still stick behind the bumper. Now would it? I do have one thing I screwed up and is annoying me. I meant to have the seam of the tube down. So now we gotta look at that.